My project is on Young Mr. Lincoln, directed by John Ford. Virginia Wexman argues that Ford uses a lot of elements from his era. While this may be true, Ford's unique creative genius lies mostly in his ability to develop characters. In this film, he develops the character of Lincoln with two sides, a politician side and a side that shows his humanity. A cinema scholar, J.A. Place, claims that the film not only establishes a creation of values, but also affirms and critiques the values by which we live. In Place's opinion, this last point is what differentiates John Ford's work and makes him a revered producer in cinema. He continues on to say that Young Mr. Lincoln is dependent on the audience's understanding of Lincoln. This is shown in many ways, including the following speech, Lincoln's first speech in the film, starting with, "I presume y'all know who I am." Lincoln's character assumes the audience and the other characters he is talking to already know who he is. This shows how John Ford let the audience do some of the work.
Gentlemen and fellow citizens, I presume you all know who I am. I'm plain Abraham Lincoln.
Ford also builds up Lincoln's character as a normal person. In other words, he takes the politician side out of him. In the next clip, we get an insight to Lincoln's private thoughts. He tells his wife, Anne, his insecurities about not having a strong educational background. Anne has to reassure him that he taught himself most of what he needs to know. It is interesting that we get to look inside the brain of Lincoln. While he acts one way as a public figure, he has doubts about himself when people are not watching. Ford does this so we see Lincoln more of a person than a politician. Again, this shows how Ford's character development in Young Mr. Lincoln is essential to the film and a meaningful contribution to cinema.
More like the old Hoster fella's trying to sell. Sound of skin and skeleton and free from faults and faculties.
I know how smart you are. How ambitious you are, too.
Ambitious?
You are deep down underneath, even if you won't admit it.
Gotta have education these days to get anywhere. I never went to school as much as a year in my whole life.
But you've educated yourself. Read poetry and Shakespeare and now law.
Chuck Kleinhans discusses young Mr. Lincoln's ability to reference the past but still be different. He says that the film is not a transformation of its social and historical context. Instead, it is a starting point of a more complicated relationship. Therefore, there is a relationship between young Mr. Lincoln and the historical context surrounding it, but it's not as strong of a connection as originally assumed. Because of this, Ford uses his freedom to revert from history and makes Lincoln more of a character than the person we think of, the president wearing a top hat. Ford does not completely dismiss this side of Lincoln, however. Lincoln's ability to use humor to get people on his side is shown here.
Well, I know that, John. What I'm afraid of is that some of the jurors might not know you, and that'd put me at a great disadvantage.
We see how Ford uses both sides of Lincoln to build him into a more complex character. This next scene shows Lincoln's humanity. He seems surprised and a bit nervous before walking on stage to deliver a speech. Ford's ability to combine the two sides of Lincoln and make him a more complex character is why he should be revered in the cinema world. Ford has the unique ability to use the history, but also to develop a side of Lincoln that the audience can relate to, so we can see both sides of Lincoln into a deeper form of character development. Here is my list of citations. Thank you all for listening.